Imagine waking not to an alarm clock, not to the gentle glow of morning sunlight filtering through curtains, Triton, so part of bolts, but to the raw, unfiltered sounds of a world that wants you dead. The distant roar of something large moving through the forest. The sudden cry of a bird startled into flight. The crack of a branch that might mean predator or prey, or prey. This is how consciousness arrives for a man who lives 30,000 years before the concept of history itself, in a time when humanity clings to existence by the thinnest of threads. This deal could be bind at a hall, when every single day is a negotiation with forces that do not care whether you live or die. No grocery stores wait around the corner. No hospitals stand ready to mend broken bones. No police will come if you call for help. There is only you, your family group, and a world of such breathtaking beauty and casual lethality that modern humans, transported back to this moment, Tidbo, Oroa, you would likely perish within days. But you are not a modern human. You are something both more and less than that. You are a survivor in the truest sense of the word, and ideorder, carrying within your mind a library of knowledge so vast and so precisely calibrated to your environment that it would take a contemporary person decades to even begin to approximate it. And aim somewhere. You know which plants heal and which plants kill. You know the patterns of animal movement across seasons, measured not in calendates, but in the subtle shifts of temperature, the angle of sunlight, the behavior of insects. You know how to read a landscape like a book written in a language of stone and water and vegetation. Power to Ingdao, seeing stories in the lay of the land that speak of where animals drink, where they bed down, where they are most vulnerable. You know how to create fire from nearly nothing, to fashion tools that can cut through hide, bone, and bone, to construct shelter that will keep your family alive through conditions that would defeat the unprepared. I'd a rare one, and you must deploy all of this knowledge every single day. Oh, because the alternative to success is not merely discomfort or inconvenience, but death, swift and final and absolute. Let yourself drift now into this world, into this life, into a day that begins, as they all begin, with the pressing against your skin and the darkness slowly retreating from the mouth of the cave you call home. The first sensation is always the cold. It arrives before consciousness fully forms, creeping through the layers of fur and hide that cover your body. A sight, hand finding the spaces between, touching skin with fingers that feel almost malicious in their persistence. Or hand-warned, your eyes remain closed, but your mind begins its automatic assessment. Indeed, uncommonly, the routine so deeply ingrained that it requires no conscious thought. The sounds around you, the breathing of your family members, the soft, regular rhythm that means sleep continues. Anbo, that means the night has passed without incident, without the sudden scrambling that would indicate danger. And danger, or and por, the quality of the air tells you things. The slight movement against your face suggests the wind's direction. Wanuru tom, the smell carries information about weather, about the state of the fire that was banked before sleep for sleep. Wo side for dian, about whether moisture is building, that might mean rain or snow. All of this processes in the moments before your eyes open, your brain running through its protocols, checking systems. We hekordo fi sate for, preparing for another day of the only life you have ever known or could ever imagine. When your eyes finally open, the darkness inside the cave is not absolute. There is always some light, filtering in from the entrance, enough to show the rough stone walls, the shapes of sleeping bodies, arranged around the remains of the fire pit, the bundles of supplies and tools that represent the accumulated wealth of your family group. And, Crow, wealth not measured in anything like money or possessions, but in capabilities, in the tools that extend your body's natural limitations, in the stored knowledge of how to survive. To survive. You do not leap to your feet. Movement in these moments must be deliberate, controlled, because your body has spent the night in positions that would horrify a modern chiropractor, curled against the cold, muscles contracted for warmth, and the transition to activity requires a certain gentleness. You sit up slowly, feeling the protest of joints that have worked hard for perhaps 30 years, which makes you ancient by the standards of your world, a repository of knowledge that the younger members of the group depend upon. Your back carries scars from encounters with animals, with falls, with the simple accumulated damage of a life lived entirely in physical engagement with the world. Your hands, illuminated by the growing light, show a topography of their own, calluses thick enough to protect against thorns and sharp stone, fingers slightly crooked from breaks that healed as well as they could without medical intervention, nails worn and practical. These hands have made thousands of tools, have butchered hundreds of animals, have fashioned countless useful objects from raw materials, have held children, have touched the face of your mate, have fought and killed when necessary. They are the hands of a craftsman, a provider, a survivor. The fire pit draws your attention because it always does, because fire is life in the most literal sense, and maintaining it is a responsibility that weighs on your consciousness every single moment of every single day. The embers from last night's fire still glow faintly beneath the ash, a constellation of orange points in the gray, and this sight brings a small moment of relief, because sometimes, despite all precautions, the fire dies completely during the night, and rekindling it is a process that can take significant time and effort. But today, the coals live, and this means the process will be simpler. You move carefully around the sleeping forms, your feet finding their way across the uneven cave floor through pure familiarity, every stone and depression known to you, through years of traversing this space in all conditions of light and darkness. Near the entrance of the cave, stacked with careful precision, lie the materials for feeding the fire, dried grass in bundles, small twigs sorted by size, larger branches that will burn for extended periods. This stack represents hours of gathering, of assessing materials for their burning qualities, of carrying them back to the cave and arranging them for easy access. Nothing in your world is effortless. Every convenience, every prepared material represents significant investment of time and energy. You select a bundle of dried grass, the material crisp and ready, carrying it back to the fire pit with movements economical and efficient. Kneeling beside the embers, you arrange the grass carefully, creating a small nest with space for air to circulate, because you understand at a fundamental level what fire needs to live, even if you could not articulate it in terms of oxygen and combustion. You have learned this through observation, through trial and error, through the teaching of elders who learn from their elders, a chain of knowledge transmission stretching back through time immemorial. With a flat stone, you carefully scrape away some of the ash covering the coals, exposing their living heart, the heat radiating against your face, even from this small source. The grass nest goes directly onto the hottest coals, and for a moment nothing happens, just contact between plant matter and heat, and then the first thin line of smoke rises, pale gray against the darkness, followed by a tiny flame, tentative, testing, and then suddenly the grass catches, the fire spreading with surprising speed through the dried material, and you are adding small twigs, now building the structure, giving the fire fuel and architecture, coaxing it from ember to flame to true fire, the light growing, pushing back the darkness, the warmth beginning to radiate outward. The fire's growth brings the first real light into the cave, and this illumination reveals more detail of your home. The walls are not bare stone, but marked with images, drawn in ochre and charcoal, representations of animals you hunt, of hands pressed against the rock and outlined, of symbols whose meaning is understood by your people, a visual language of identity and history and spiritual significance. These images are not mere decoration, but serve purposes both practical and profound, helping to teach children what animals look like, serving as focus for rituals meant to bring success in hunting, marking this place as belonging to your family group, creating a sense of continuity with past generations who sheltered here, who left their marks, who survived long enough to pass on their knowledge. The smoke from the growing fire rises naturally toward a crack in the cave ceiling, a natural chimney that allows the smoke to escape while retaining most of the heat. And this feature is one reason this particular cave was chosen, because living in smoke is miserable and dangerous, causing eye problems and breathing difficulties, but a cave with good ventilation is a treasure, a place worth defending, worth returning to season after season. Around the fire, your family begins to stir. The change in light, the crackling of burning wood, the slight increase in temperature, all of these signal that day has arrived and sleep must end. First to move is your mate, a woman whose age matches yours approximately, her body carrying the marks of multiple childbirths, of years of labor gathering plants and processing animal, hides and maintaining the cave and raising children. Her face shows lines around the eyes, not from laughter exactly, but from the constant squinting required to work on detailed tasks in less than ideal light, from scanning horizons for danger and opportunity, from the accumulated weight of 30 years of vigilance. She sits up, runs her hands through hair that is thick and dark and tangled from sleep, and her eyes meet yours across the fire with a look of simple acknowledgement, a recognition of another day beginning, another cycle of the endless tasks that keep your family alive. There is affection between you, though it manifests differently than in the modern world, expressed not through words of love, which do not exist in your limited vocabulary in the same way, but through the countless acts of cooperation, through the sharing of food, through the protection of children, through the simple fact of enduring together through years of hardship. Your children begin to wake as well, 3 of them currently alive, though you have had others who did not survive infancy, their small bodies given back to the earth with grief that your limited language could barely express, but that sat in your chest like a stone for seasons afterward. The oldest is a boy approaching adolescence, his body beginning the transformation toward adulthood, already participating in hunts in limited capacity, learning the skills that will determine whether he thrives or perishes as an independent hunter. The middle child is a girl of perhaps 8 years, quick and intelligent, already showing skill in identifying plants, in remembering the locations of resources, in the detailed observation that makes the difference between competence and excellence in survival tasks. The youngest is a boy of perhaps 4 years, still dependent on adults for most things, but learning constantly, his brain absorbing information about the world with the incredible plasticity of childhood, building the neural pathways that will allow him to navigate this dangerous world. Each child represents a massive investment of resources and time and protection, years of carrying and feeding and teaching, and the return on this investment will not fully materialize until they reach adulthood and begin contributing substantially to the family group's survival. This delayed return makes children both precious and vulnerable, dependent on the family's ability to generate surplus resources beyond immediate needs. As the family stirs, there is a brief moment of interaction, of acknowledgement, not elaborate or verbal, but physical touches and glances that reaffirm bonds, that establish that everyone survived the night, that the group remains intact. Your mate moves to the entrance of the cave, looking out at the emerging day, assessing conditions, and you join her, standing where the cave mouth opens onto the world. The view from here is one you have seen thousands of times, but never grows boring because it changes constantly. The same landscape transformed by season, by weather, by time of day, by the presence or absence of animals, by subtle factors that your experienced eye can detect and interpret. Before you stretches a valley, a river winding through its center, the water catching the first light of dawn and reflecting it in silver lines. The valley floor shows different vegetation types, areas of open grassland, clumps of trees, rocky outcrops, each micro-environment hosting different resources, different opportunities, different dangers. The hills rising on the valley's far side show the same vegetation patterns you stand among, primarily deciduous forest at this altitude, with coniferous forest beginning higher up on the slopes, and above that, visible on the highest peaks, the white of snow that remains year-round. The sky is clearing after what must have been a cloudy night, though you slept through most of it, and the emerging blue suggests that today will be dry. Good conditions for travel, for hunting, for gathering, though the temperature remains cold, your breath visible in the morning air, small clouds that form and dissipate with each exhalation. The season is autumn, the time when the natural world begins its preparation for winter, when animals fatten on the abundance of late-growing season, when plants produce seeds and fruits in profusion, when the imperative to gather and store becomes urgent because winter is coming, inevitable as death, and those who have not prepared adequately will not see spring. This knowledge sits in your mind with absolute clarity, not as abstract understanding, but as visceral certainty built from years of experience, from winters that tested your family's preparations, from hunger that came when stores ran low, from the exhaustion of trying to hunt and gather in conditions that make every task exponentially more difficult. Your first task of the day before anything else is to assess the immediate surroundings for danger. This assessment happens automatically, your eyes scanning the landscape in a pattern developed through years of practice, looking for movement, for shapes that do not belong, for the telltale signs of large predators that might have approached during the night. The cave entrance shows no tracks in the dirt, except those of your family from the previous day. A good sign, meaning nothing large came investigating while you slept. The area immediately before the cave is deliberately kept clear of vegetation, providing a buffer zone where approaching animals cannot hide, where the ground surface will show tracks, where your family has some seconds of warning before danger arrives at the cave mouth. This clearing is not natural but maintained through effort, through cutting and removing plants, through vigilance, because nature constantly works to reclaim cleared spaces, sending forth seedlings, spreading grass, trying to close the gap you have created for your safety. Further out, the forest begins, and this is where your attention focuses most intently, because the forest is where danger lives, where cave lions and cave bears and packs of wolves move through territories that overlap with yours, where competition for resources is a daily reality, where encounters with other human groups sometimes occur, encounters that might be peaceful or might be violent, depending on the circumstances and necessity and the personalities involved. The forest appears quiet this morning, birds beginning their dawn chorus, small movements in the underbrush that suggest rabbits or other small game, nothing that indicates the presence of large predators, though absence of evidence is not evidence of evidence of evidence of absence, and you remain watchful, knowing that complacency kills, that the moment you stop paying attention is the moment when danger tends to arrive. This vigilance is exhausting in a way that modern humans rarely experience, a constant low-level activation of threat detection systems, an inability to ever fully relax, because relaxation in your world is a luxury that can only be afforded in the safest of circumstances, inside the cave with good fire and multiple adults awake and watching. The river in the valley below represents both opportunity and danger, a source of water that is absolutely essential, but also a place where many animals come to drink, creating a concentration of both prey and predator, a place where encounters happen, where violence erupts, where the careful approach is rewarded, and the careless approach is punished. The river also serves as a highway of sorts, a navigational reference point that you use to orient yourself in the landscape, to describe locations to other family members, to conceptualize the territory that your group uses. When you think about space, you think in terms of landmarks, in terms of relationships between notable features, the way the river curves near the large boulder, the place where the stream feeds into the main flow, the distinctive tree that was struck by lightning and now stands as a blackened skeleton, visible from great distances. These landmarks form a mental map in your mind, not abstract or drawn but concrete and experiential, built from countless hours of moving through this territory, of noting features, of surviving by knowing where you are and how to get where you need to go. Your mate speaks, her voice carrying the distinctive sounds of your group's language, a system of communication that uses perhaps 300 words combined with gestures and intonation to convey meaning. She is saying that today would be good for checking the fish trap in the river, that the waters have been running well and there might be catch waiting. This fish trap represents significant investment of labor, a structure built from carefully selected branches, woven together and weighted with stones, designed to funnel fish into an enclosure from which they cannot easily escape, allowing you to harvest protein with less energy expenditure than active hunting requires. The trap must be checked regularly and maintained, repaired when water damage occurs, repositioned when the river changes its patterns. But when it works, it provides food with remarkable efficiency. And this efficiency matters enormously in a world where energy is the currency that determines survival. Every calorie you consume must be weighed against the calories expended to obtain it, and strategies that provide favorable ratios are pursued and refined and passed on to the next generation. You agree with her assessment, nodding, adding that you also need to check the snare lines you set 2 days ago in a section of forest where you have observed rabbit trails, places where these small animals repeatedly travel, creating visible paths through the vegetation. These snares are simple in design but effective, loops of braided plant fiber positioned at the right height and location to catch a rabbit, his head as it moves along its habitual path. The loop tightening as the animal struggles, death coming relatively quickly. Setting snares is a skill that requires detailed knowledge of animal behavior, of how to identify active trails versus abandoned ones, of how to position the snare so it is not visible to the cautious prey, of how to secure the anchor so the trapped animal cannot pull the entire setup loose. And you have been setting snares since childhood, learning through observation and instruction and the feedback of success and failure. Not all snares catch animals. Many are avoided or triggered without capture. But the investment of time and materials is small enough that the occasional success makes the practice worthwhile, providing food that costs you only the initial setup effort and the time to check the lines. Before leaving the cave, before venturing into the wider world, there are preparations that must be made, routines that must be followed, because venturing unprepared is dangerous and potentially fatal. You gather your tools, items that represent thousands of hours of effort in their creation and maintenance. The primary tool is your spear, a weapon that extends your reach and your lethality far beyond what your body alone could achieve. The spear shaft is straight wood, carefully selected and shaped, approximately twice your height in length, balanced so it can be thrust or thrown depending on circumstances. The spear point is stone, flint that you napped yourself, striking one stone against another with controlled force and precise angle to remove flakes, slowly shaping the raw material into a point with sharp edges and a piercing tip, then hafting this stone point to the wooden shaft using sinew and pitch, creating a bond that will hold under the stresses of use. This spear has taken a life, multiple lives, both animal and human, and the wood is worn smooth where your hand grips it, shaped by use into a perfect fit for your palm. Your secondary tool is a knife, smaller than the spear point, but similarly made from flint, hafted to a shorter handle that allows for close work, for butchering animals, for cutting plant materials, for the countless tasks that require a sharp edge. The blade is maintained with obsessive care because a dull knife is dangerous, requiring more force and more likely to slip, and you resharpen it regularly, using a softer stone to remove tiny flakes from the edge, restoring its cutting ability. A third tool, carried in a pouch at your waist, is a fire-starting kit, materials that allow you to create fire even away from the cave, even in conditions that make fire creation difficult. This kit includes flint, a striking stone, dried grass tinder kept carefully dry, and fungus that smolders reliably when struck by sparks. The ability to create fire wherever you are is a capability that separates humans from all other animals, that allows you to survive in conditions that would be impossible otherwise, that provides warmth and light and protection, and the ability to cook food, making it safer and more digestible. You have created thousands of fires in your lifetime, and the process is second nature, automatic. But you never take it for granted, never assume success, because fire is life and life is never guaranteed. Additional items are gathered, a water container made from the stomach of a large animal, cleaned and treated and sealed, able to carry water for drinking, when you are away from sources. A carrying bag woven from plant fibers, used for bringing back materials gathered during the day, whether plant foods or useful stones, or anything else that needs transport. A throwing stick, a specialized tool for hunting birds and small game. Basically, a carefully weighted and balanced piece of wood that can be thrown with accuracy to stun or kill prey at distances too far for hand capture. Each of these tools has specific purposes, specific techniques for use, specific maintenance requirements, and managing this toolkit is a constant responsibility, part of the mental overhead of survival that never stops, that operates in the background of consciousness continuously. Modern humans often speak of mental load in terms of remembering appointments or managing household tasks, but your mental load is of a different order entirely. A constant tracking of multiple variables, resources, dangers, opportunities, tool states, weather patterns, animal behaviors, family member needs, all of this processing simultaneously, all of it necessary, all of it consuming cognitive resources that in the modern world might be directed toward very different purposes. Your mate gathers her own tools, different from yours, but equally essential, including digging sticks for excavating roots, cutting tools for harvesting plants, containers for carrying gathered materials, and a carrier for the youngest child, a sling of hide and fiber that allows her to keep the child close while leaving her hands relatively free for work. The gendered division of labor in your family group is not absolute, but is pronounced, with men primarily responsible for hunting large game and defending the group, while women focus on gathering plant foods and small game and maintaining the home base. Though there is overlap and flexibility, and both types of work are understood to be essential. The protein from hunting is crucial, providing calories and nutrients that plant foods cannot match in concentration, but plant foods provide the bulk of calories consumed, the reliable base of the diet that can be obtained even when hunting fails, and the gathering work your mate does is therefore not secondary, but fundamental to survival. A family group where the gathering is done poorly will starve even if hunting is successful, because you cannot eat only meat without becoming sick. Your body requires the nutrients and fiber and variety that plant foods provide. The older boy is coming with you today, part of his ongoing education in hunting and navigation and all the skills he will need as an adult male. He gathers his own smaller spear, a weapon sized for his strength but functional, capable of killing if used properly, and he wears the same expression of focused seriousness that you remember feeling at his age. The understanding that what he learns now will determine whether he lives or dies as an adult. Childhood in your world is not protected or prolonged, as it is in the modern world, where children are sheltered from responsibility and danger for extended years. Here, children begin contributing to family survival as soon as they are physically capable, and education is not academic but intensely practical, focused entirely on skills that have direct survival value. Reading and writing do not exist. Mathematics, beyond simple counting, is unknown. But your children learn plant identification with botanical precision, learn to track animals by interpreting traces most modern humans would never notice, learn to navigate by sun and stars and landmarks, learn to assess weather from subtle environmental cues, learn to make tools from raw materials, learn to work cooperatively in groups where success depends on coordination. This education is not formal, not structured in the way modern schooling is structured, but is instead continuous, happening through observation and participation and direct instruction in moments when teaching opportunities arise. The family group splits as the day's work begins. Your mate taking the middle daughter and youngest son toward the valley floor, where plant gathering will be productive, while you and the older boy head into the forest, where your snare lines wait and where opportunities for hunting might present themselves. The girl watches you leave with an expression of longing because she admires hunting and wishes to participate more fully, but her mother needs her assistance with gathering, and she goes without protest, understanding that all roles are necessary, that the family survives through the coordination of different types of work. You make a mental note to take her along on a future hunt, to give her opportunity to observe and learn, because flexibility and cross-training make the group more resilient, more capable of adapting if circumstances change, if injury or death removes someone from their typical role. This sort of long-term thinking, this planning for contingencies, is part of what makes humans effective survivors, despite their physical limitations, despite being slower than prey and weaker than predators, and less adapted to environmental extremes than many other species. The forest closes around you and your son as you leave the cave's clearing, the trees filtering morning light into a complex pattern of illumination and shadow, the undergrowth thick enough to obscure vision beyond a few dozen paces in most directions. This limited visibility is something you account for, constantly aware that predators could be close without your knowledge, that your early warning system is reduced to sound and scent, and the behavior of other animals whose alarm calls might indicate danger. You move quietly but not silently, because silent movement is extremely difficult and energy-intensive, requiring constant attention to foot placement, to brushing against vegetation, to the countless ways that movement through natural environments creates sound. Instead, you move with reasonable care, with awareness, producing sounds that are natural and non-threatening, the sounds of a large animal moving through its territory, sounds that other animals will hear and interpret and respond to based on their own needs and threat assessments. Your son follows, attempting to match your movement style, learning through imitation how to place feet, how to shift weight, how to move through space in ways that minimize noise and maximize efficiency. The first snare line is perhaps a half-hour's walk from the cave, distance measured not in meters or miles, but in time and effort, in the energy required to traverse the terrain, crossing a stream, climbing a moderate slope, navigating through denser and less dense patches of forest until you reach the area where you observed rabbit activity several days ago. The trail is still visible, a slight depression in the leaf litter where small bodies have passed repeatedly, disturbing the surface materials, creating a path of least resistance that subsequent animals follow, because movement along existing paths requires less energy than breaking new trail. Your snares were set at intervals along this trail, positioned at places where the topography funnels movement, where rabbits cannot easily detour, where the natural landscape works with your trap to increase success probability. The first two snares are empty and unsprung, the loops hanging undisturbed. And this is neither surprising nor discouraging, because success rates with snares are never absolute, always probabilistic, and you simply reset the positions slightly, adjusting based on subtle changes in the trail that suggest where recent traffic has been heaviest. The third snare has been triggered, and as you approach, you can see the brown form lying still in the leaf litter. A rabbit strangled in the loop, its death probably occurring sometime during the night. You feel a moment of satisfaction, not triumph exactly, but the quiet fulfillment that comes from effective action, from technique executed properly, from food secured for your family. The rabbit is still fresh, the body not yet stiff with rigor mortis, and you quickly assess its condition, looking for any signs of scavenging, checking that the carcass is intact and usable. Everything looks good, and you remove the rabbit from the snare, carefully loosening the loop, examining the braided fiber for damage. Because these snares represent investment and must be maintained if they are to continue providing value. The fiber shows some wear but remains functional, and you reset the snare, positioning it carefully, making minute adjustments based on your reading of the trail, then secure the rabbit to your belt. Its weight small but meaningful, perhaps 1 or 2 meals worth of meat for the family, enough to make the effort of setting and checking the line worthwhile. Your son has been watching this entire process with focused attention, learning not just the mechanical actions, but the reasoning behind them, the way you assess the trail, the way you position the snare, the way you evaluate the condition of both carcass and equipment. He asks a question in your simple language, wanting to know how you decided where to place this particular snare, and you answer by pointing to features of the terrain, to the way roots create a natural narrowing in the trail, to the overhanging branch that provides anchor for the snare, to the sight lines that make the trap less visible to the cautious prey. This teaching moment is valuable, knowledge transmission that cannot be replaced by any other method, because your son is learning from success, seeing the theory proven by practice, building in his mind the conceptual framework that will allow him to set his own snares effectively, to feed himself and his future family, to survive in a world where these skills are not optional extras, but absolute requirements. The teaching happens without formality, without structured lesson plans, but is no less effective for that, perhaps more effective because it occurs in context, in the real environment with real stakes, with immediate feedback and clear outcomes. The remaining snares on this line are checked, yielding no additional catch but showing no damage, and you proceed to the second line, which runs through a different section of forest where you have observed different animal signs, different opportunities. The walk between locations gives you opportunity to observe the forest more broadly, to note the condition of various plants, to see evidence of animal activity, to continuously update your mental model of the territory and its resources. You notice that a particular type of nut-bearing tree is producing heavily this year, the ground beneath littered with nuts in their hulls, and you make a mental note to tell your mate about this location, because these nuts are valuable food, high in fats and calories, storable through the winter if properly processed, worth the effort of gathering and transporting back to the cave. The observation seems small but represents the kind of continuous resource monitoring that allows your family to exploit the environment effectively, to know where food sources are located, when they become available, how abundant they are, whether they are worth the energy investment required to harvest them. You also notice tracks pressed into soft earth near a stream crossing, the distinctive prints of a large cat, probably a cave lion, the size of the paw prints suggesting a male, the depth of the impression suggesting significant weight. The tracks are not fresh, probably from yesterday or the day before, the edges of the prints already softening from moisture and small disturbances, but their presence reminds you that this area is part of overlapping territories, that you share this landscape with apex predators that view humans as potential prey, especially vulnerable humans, like children or individuals caught alone. This knowledge does not paralyze you with fear, but sharpens your attention, reminds you to remain vigilant, to keep your son close, to be prepared for sudden encounters that could turn violent in second. The relationship between humans and large predators in your time is complex, not the clean separation of the modern world where humans dominate overwhelmingly, but a more balanced equation where humans are dangerous enough to avoid usually but vulnerable enough to attack sometimes, where the outcome of encounters depends on numbers and weapons and circumstances and luck. The second snare line yields another rabbit and a pine marten, a weasel-like predator that was probably investigating the rabbit snares and got caught itself. Poetic justice of a sort, and this additional meat is welcome, increasing the day's take to levels that will meaningfully contribute to the family's food supply. 3 small animals do not sound like much in a world where a single shopping trip can fill a refrigerator. But in your world, this is success. This is 3 animals that your family will consume entirely, wasting nothing, using meat and organs and hide and sinew and bones, extracting every possible bit of value from each carcass. The processing of these animals will happen back at the cave, a communal activity where family members work together. The work itself serving social purposes beyond the practical outcomes, creating time for interaction and teaching and the reinforcement of social bonds through shared labor. With the snare lines checked and 3 animals secured, you consider the next phase of the day's activities. Returning to the cave now would be premature, wasting daylight hours that could be used for additional resource gathering, for hunting, for the countless other tasks that fill every day from dawn until darkness makes outside activity dangerous. You decide to move higher into the hills, toward an area where you have previously observed deer, where the combination of forest and meadow creates edge habitat that herbivores favor, where sight lines are better than in the dense forest, allowing for stalking and potentially for a kill that would provide far more meat than the rabbits and marten, enough to feed the family for many days, enough to make smoking and storing worthwhile, creating reserves for future times when hunting is less successful. This decision is communicated to your son, not as a question, but as a statement of intent, and he nods understanding, shifting his grip on his small spear, his body language showing both excitement and nervousness because he has never been present for a successful deer hunt, has never seen the culmination of the stalking and the throwing and the killing. And this will be new experience for him, valuable regardless of whether success is achieved. The terrain changes as you climb, the forest thinning, the trees becoming smaller, the underbrush different in character, and these changes are not random but reflect underlying patterns of soil and water and elevation and sunlight, patterns you understand intuitively through years of observation even if you could not articulate the mechanisms. The climb is not steep but is sustained, and you feel it in your legs, in your breathing. The energy expenditure real and sustained and significant, and you are conscious of this cost, weighing it against potential benefits, because energy is always the limiting factor, the resource that determines how much activity you can sustain, how far you can travel, how long you can work before exhaustion forces rest. Your son is breathing harder than you are, his younger body strong but less efficient, less conditioned to this specific activity, and you moderate your pace slightly to accommodate him, not making an issue of it, not highlighting the adjustment, just moving at a speed that allows him to keep up without overstrain, because teaching also means not breaking the student, not pushing so hard that injury or burnout occur, finding the balance between challenge and capability. As elevation increases, visibility improves, the trees shorter and more widely spaced, allowing you to see further, to scan larger areas of terrain, and you begin moving more cautiously, more deliberately, because the improved visibility works both ways. You can see further, but can also be seen from further. And deer have excellent vision, excellent hearing, and will detect threats long before those threats get within range for a successful attack. You begin employing stalking techniques learned through decades of practice, moving when the wind favors you, carrying your scent away from areas where prey might be, freezing when deer might be looking your direction, using terrain and vegetation to break up your outline, to avoid appearing as a human-shaped silhouette that prey animals recognize as danger. Your son attempts to mirror your movements with limited success, his body control not yet refined to the point where truly silent movement is possible. But he is learning, each moment adding to his education, building the skills that will eventually allow him to stalk effectively. You reach a meadow area, grasses and low shrubs rather than trees, and you stop at the edge, staying within the cover of the forest, scanning the open area with careful attention, looking for the distinctive shapes of deer, for movement, for color patterns that indicate animal presence. At first you see nothing, just the meadow and the vegetation and the rising hills beyond. But then, as your eyes adjust, as your brain processes the visual information with more sophistication, you detect them, 3 deer, perhaps 200 paces distant, grazing on the meadow's far side, their bodies partially concealed by terrain folds, but visible to eyes that know what to look for. The deer appear to be a small family group, probably a doe with 2 juveniles from this year's breeding, the young animals nearly full grown, but still showing some of the characteristics of youth in their body proportions and behavior. This is opportunity, genuine opportunity, and you feel the familiar surge of focus that accompanies the beginning of a hunt, the narrowing of attention, the heightening of senses, the preparation of body and mind for the intense effort that will follow. The challenge now is range. 200 paces is far beyond the reliable range for spear throwing, where accuracy drops dramatically, and kinetic energy decreases to levels that might wound, but not kill, creating the worst possible outcome, an injured animal that flees and suffers and dies slowly far away, where you cannot recover it, wasting the life and providing your family with nothing. You need to close the distance, to get within perhaps 50 paces, close enough that a well-thrown spear has reasonable probability of hitting a vital area with enough force to cause rapid death. But closing that distance across open meadow is virtually impossible. The deer would detect your approach long before you got close enough. Their vision and hearing evolved specifically to detect predators, their survival depending on early threat detection and rapid flight. This means you need to use the terrain, to use the wind, to move with extraordinary care, to make the stalk a process that might take an hour or more, that might ultimately fail despite perfect execution because of factors beyond your control, a randomly shifting wind, an unforeseeable noise, bad luck in any of its countless forms. You signal to your son to remain still using hand gestures that convey the instruction clearly despite the absence of words, and he nods understanding, lowering himself into a crouch, minimizing his profile, and you begin the stalk, moving back into the forest cover, circling around the meadow's edge, using trees and terrain folds to conceal your movement, stopping frequently to check the wind direction by tossing small amounts of dust and watching how it drifts, ensuring that your scent continues to move away from the deer rather than toward them. The stalk is meditation and torture simultaneously, requiring absolute focus and painful slowness, every step considered, every movement minimized, your body moving through space in ways that feel unnatural and awkward, but are necessary. Are the difference between success and failure. Time loses its normal structure during a stalk. seconds stretching into subjective minutes. The distance that might normally take 10 minutes requiring 40, every meter fought for, every angle calculated. The task now is field processing, a job that must be done here rather than attempting to transport the entire carcass back to the cave, because a full-grown deer weighs far more than you can carry, perhaps 60 or 70 kilograms, an impossible load for a single human to transport significant distances. Instead, you will butcher the animal here, reducing it to manageable portions that can be carried, a process that requires knowledge and skill and sharp tools and significant time. You retrieve your spear first, pulling it from the deer's chest, examining the point for damage, finding it intact, wiping blood on grass to clean it, because the tool must be maintained, must be ready for immediate use if danger appears, if predators are attracted by the smell of blood, if any of the countless threats materialize. The spear goes back into your hand ready while you draw your knife and begin the butchering process. Work you have done hundreds of times, following patterns learned through teaching and practice, efficient sequences of cuts that separate hide from meat, that open body cavities that divide the carcass into portions. The first cut opens the abdomen carefully, avoiding puncturing the intestines which would contaminate meat, and you reach inside, feeling the warmth of organs still holding body heat, removing the stomach and intestines which are set aside because these are not typically eaten, but can have other uses, the intestines potentially cleaned and used as cordage or containers, the stomach as a water container. The liver comes out next, dark red and dense, a highly nutritious organ that will be eaten quickly, probably tonight, because it does not preserve well. The heart follows, small but valuable, another nutrient, dense organ that your family prizes. These organs go into your carrying bag, protected from dirt. The lungs are damaged from the spear strike, but are removed anyway, because even damaged they can be processed for the dogs. If your family currently has dogs, the semi-domesticated wolves that sometimes live near human groups in complicated relationships of mutual benefit and tension. The hide is worked free from the carcass, a process that uses the knife to separate the connective tissue that binds skin to muscle, peeling back the fur to reveal the meat beneath. And this hide is valuable, will be scraped and treated and used for clothing or bags or shelter reinforcement, representing hours of future work, but yielding a product that has no substitute, that provides warmth and protection that plant fibers cannot match. As you work, you remain aware of your surroundings, constantly scanning, because the smell of blood and the sounds of butchering can attract scavengers and predators, because you are vulnerable here, focused on the detailed work, potentially missing threats, until they are dangerously close. Your son serves as additional sentry, watching while you work, his spear ready, his eyes scanning the forest edge, participating in the collective security that allows the work to proceed. The meat is separated from the skeleton, the major muscle groups removed and divided into portions sized for carrying, the bones cleaned of meat and some taken for marrow, which is fatty and delicious and calorically dense. Other bones left because there is simply too much material to transport everything, and choices must be made based on nutritional value and utility. The ribs are taken, meat still attached, a portion that will roast well over fire. The leg quarters are deboned to reduce weight. The meat packed into the hide, which now serves as a carrying container. The process takes perhaps 2 hours. The sun now well above the horizon, the day warming slightly, though the temperature remains cool. Good conditions for meat transport because coolness slows bacterial growth, extends the time before spoilage begins. Though you understand none of the microbiology, knowing only through observation that meat keeps longer in cool conditions, that warm weather means faster spoilage, that certain treatments, like smoking or drying, extend preservation time. When the butchering is complete, you have perhaps 30 kilograms of meat and organs and hide divided into 2 bundles that can be carried, one by you and one shared between you and your son. Because his strength is not yet sufficient to carry a full load, but he can manage a portion, can contribute, and this contribution matters to him, to his sense of participation, to his growing identity. As provider, the remains of the carcass are left in the meadow, bones and organs and tissue that your family cannot use. But this material is not wasted in a larger sense, because scavengers will find it within hours. Foxes and ravens and insects, the nutrients cycling back into the ecosystem, feeding other lives. The deer's death creating opportunities for other organisms in the vast interconnected web of consumption and decay and regrowth that characterizes natural systems. You offer a moment of acknowledgement to the deer, not prayer exactly, because your spiritual concepts are different from what would be recognized as religion in the modern sense, but a moment of recognition, of thanks, of respect for the animal that died to provide for your family. A practice that feels necessary, that maintains your sense of right relationship with the other lives you depend upon. The journey back to the cave is harder than the outward journey, the weight of the meat making every step more effortful, the energy expenditure significant, your body burning through calories to transport calories, a equation that must remain positive or the hunting becomes unsustainable. The sun climbs toward its peak as you walk, following different paths than your outward route because you are always learning the territory, always exploring, always building your mental map, and taking the same route repeatedly would miss opportunities to discover new resources, new features, new options. Your son struggles with his portion of the load, the weight more than he is accustomed to, but he does not complain, does not ask to reduce his burden, because he understands that this is real work, that he is contributing meaningfully, that his effort matters, and these experiences are building in him the mental toughness that will be essential to his survival as an adult. You moderate the pace to accommodate him, taking rest breaks that you frame as opportunities to check the surroundings, to listen to the forest, to maintain awareness, so that the breaks serve practical purposes beyond just recovery, so that your son does not feel that his limitations are dictating the journey. As you approach the cave, you see smoke rising from the entrance area, indicating that the fire has been built up, that your mate has returned from gathering, that the home base is active and occupied. This sight brings a sense of relief and satisfaction, the feeling of returning to safety after exposure to the dangers of the wider world, even though the cave itself offers only relative safety, only a slight improvement in security compared to the open forest, enough to make sleep possible, but not enough to allow for true relaxation. The dogs that live near your family group appear as you approach, lean animals with wolf ancestry, visible in their features, their relationship with your family complex, and not quite the domestication that will exist in later millennia. More like a mutual arrangement where the dogs receive scraps of food and some protection, and the family receives early warning of approaching threats and occasional help in hunting. The dogs able to track and bay animals that humans alone would have difficulty hunting. The dogs recognize you, tails wagging, but bodies maintaining a cautious distance, because these are not pets in the modern sense, but semi-wild animals whose cooperation is conditional and who might turn aggressive if mistreated or if resources become scarce. Your mate emerges from the cave as you arrive, her carrying bags full of gathered materials, roots and nuts and berries and other plant foods, her day having been as productive as yours, her contribution to family survival equal in importance, though different in character. She sees the meat you carry, and her face shows satisfaction, because meat is valued, is desired, is never certain, and a successful hunt means good eating tonight, means security for the coming days, means that the constant worry about food can be reduced slightly, temporarily. The children emerge as well, the middle daughter and youngest son, their faces showing excitement at the sight of the deer meat, because they understand what this means, can anticipate the meal to come, the taste of roasted meat, the feeling of full stomachs, pleasures that are never guaranteed, that never become boring through repetition, because they are never reliable enough to take for granted. The family converges at the cave entrance, drawn together by the successful hunt, by the prospect of shared food, by the fundamental social bonding that occurs around resource acquisition and consumption, patterns deeply embedded in human psychology, creating feelings of safety and satisfaction and belonging that are among the few reliable pleasures in a difficult world. The meat is brought into the cave and laid out on clean stone surfaces, and the family begins the processing work, the detailed labor that converts carcass into usable products. Your mate takes the lead on hide processing, scraping away fat and tissue from the skin's inner surface, a task requiring hours of repetitive motion, of careful work to avoid damaging the hide while removing material that would rot and ruin the final product. The daughter helps with this work, learning the techniques, building the arm strength and hand coordination that the task requires, understanding that this skill will be essential to her future, that her ability to process hides will directly impact her family's comfort and survival when she has her own household. The meat is divided, some portions set aside for immediate consumption to be roasted over the fire tonight, other portions prepared for preservation, cut into thin strips that will be hung over the fire for smoking, the smoke containing compounds that inhibit bacterial growth, that allow the meat to be stored for extended periods, creating reserves that can be consumed when fresh food is unavailable. The organs are handled with particular care, the liver and heart cut into portions that will be cooked and eaten today, their high nutrient content valued, their relatively poor preservation characteristics, meaning that immediate consumption is optimal. The bones with marrow are cracked open, the fatty marrow extracted and eaten raw or cooked, a delicacy that provides concentrated calories and fat-soluble vitamins, nutrients that are often limiting in the diet that the body craves. That taste intensely satisfying in ways that reflect genuine nutritional needs rather than arbitrary preference. The youngest child is given a marrow bone to gnaw, his teeth and jaws working to extract every bit of value, and the sight of him eating with such focus and satisfaction brings you a feeling of success, of provision, of fulfilling your role as provider, feelings that are deeply rewarding even in the absence of external validation or recognition beyond your immediate family. As the processing continues, your mate shares information about her day's gathering, describing locations where she found abundant plant foods, where certain mushrooms are fruiting, where a bee colony has established itself in a hollow tree, representing potential honey, a rare sweetness that your family obtains perhaps a few times per year when opportunity and courage align, because harvesting honey means dealing with thousands of angry bees, means accepting multiple stings, means risking severe reactions if someone in the family has allergies. But the reward is so valued that the risks are considered worthwhile. She describes encounters with other family groups, distant sightings of humans on the far valley slopes, reminders that your family is not alone in this territory, that competition for resources exists, that relationships with these other groups must be maintained neither too friendly nor too hostile, a careful balance that requires ongoing attention and occasional interaction. The afternoon passes in this work, in this processing and preparing and storing, the cave filled with activity and the smells of meat and smoke and the sounds of family members working together, talking occasionally in your limited language. The communication supplemented by gesture and tone and the shared understanding that comes from years of cooperation. The work is hard but satisfying, tangible, producing visible results, converting the morning's success into concrete improvements in the family's resource position. And there is something deeply fulfilling about this kind of labor, about seeing direct connection between effort and outcome, about producing things of genuine use and value, about working with family toward shared survival goals. This satisfaction is different from what modern humans might feel in their work. Different because the stakes are so much higher, because failure means not unemployment or financial difficulty, but hunger and death, and perhaps the satisfaction is proportionally greater. The success more meaningful when measured against genuine necessity. As evening approaches, as the light begins to fade, the family transitions from work to eating, the fire built up for cooking, portions of meat spitted on green wood and positioned over coals, the heat transforming raw flesh into cooked food, the Maillard reaction creating flavors and aromas that trigger salivation and anticipation, biological responses to stimuli that signal nutritious food. The family gathers around the fire, the warmth appreciated as the temperature drops with sunset, the light pushing back darkness, creating a circle of safety and comfort within the vast, dangerous world. The meat cooks slowly, fat dripping into coals, and flaring smoke rising and carrying with it the smell of cooking meat, a smell that speaks to something primal in human consciousness, that connects you across time to all your ancestors who sat around fires cooking meat, that will connect forward to all your descendants who will do the same, an unbroken chain of humanity stretching across millennia, all gathering around fire, all eating meat when fortune allows, all finding in these moments something essential to human experience. When the meat is ready, your mate distributes portions, ensuring that everyone receives appropriate amounts, more to you and to the older boy who burned significant calories in the hunt, less to the younger children whose smaller bodies require less, but everyone receiving enough. No one going hungry, this success allowing for generosity, for full stomachs, for the rare experience of eating until satisfied, rather than eating until supplies are exhausted. The taste is rich and fatty and deeply satisfying. The venison tender from the young deer, the smoke flavor from cooking, adding complexity, and you eat with focus and appreciation. Chewing thoroughly, extracting maximum value from every bite, noting how the meat makes you feel, the surge of energy, the satisfaction of nutritional needs met, the contentment that follows protein consumption. The younger children eat with less restraint, their faces showing pure pleasure, meat juice on their chins, their bodies relaxed in the warmth and safety of the cave and fire and family, experiencing one of those moments of childhood where nothing threatens, where needs are met, where the world feels secure. After eating, there is a period of relative leisure, a rare time when immediate survival needs are temporarily satisfied, when some energy remains for activities beyond work, and this time is used for social bonding, for storytelling, in your limited language, for teaching moments, for the reinforcement of family connections that make cooperation possible, that create the trust necessary for group survival. You begin working on tool maintenance, sharpening your knife on a stone, checking the hafting on your spear, the work automatic and meditative, giving your hands something to do while your mind rests, while your body digests, while the day's stress begins to dissipate. Your son sits near you, watching, occasionally, asking questions about technique, about how to identify when an edge needs resharpening, about how to maintain the proper angle, learning not just through your answers, but through observation, through seeing the work done correctly, through absorbing the countless small details that separate adequate technique from expert technique. Your mate works on processing plant materials, cracking nuts to extract the meats, sorting seeds, preparing some items for storage and others for consumption. Her hands constantly busy, the work rhythmic and practiced, and she talks quietly with her daughter, sharing knowledge about plants, about which ones to harvest when, about how to identify immature specimens that should be left to mature, about carrying capacity assessments, about return rates for different plant types, building in the girl's mind the encyclopedic knowledge that effective gathering requires, knowledge that cannot be written down but must be memorized, must be carried in the mind, must be retrievable under all conditions. The youngest son plays with a carved wooden figure, a toy that you made for him during a previous idle moment. The figure shaped roughly like an animal, a horse perhaps, or a bison, the child's imagination filling in details that the simple carving suggests, his play serving developmental purposes, building his understanding of the world, allowing him to practice skills through pretend, to learn through simulation in low-stakes environment. As darkness deepens, as the fire burns down to coals, as the day's energy expenditure begins, manifesting as tiredness, the family prepares for sleep, banking the fire carefully, ensuring that coals remain alive beneath ash, that rekindling will be possible in the morning, that the protection and warmth of fire will continue through the night. Sleeping arrangements are assumed without discussion, each person knowing their place, positions chosen to maximize warmth sharing while respecting individual space as much as the confined area allows. The family group arranged around the fire, using it as heat source, as light source, as psychological protection against the darkness beyond. You lie down with your mate, your bodies close for warmth. The furs and hides that serve as bedding arranged over you, trapping body heat, creating a micro-environment of warmth in the otherwise cold cave. The children arrange themselves nearby, the youngest between you and your mate, the older two flanking, everyone positioned to benefit from shared warmth, to create and maintain the higher temperatures that allow sleep despite cold air temperatures that would cause hypothermia in isolated individuals. Sleep comes gradually, consciousness fading slowly, rather than switching off abruptly, your mind processing the day, reviewing successes and challenges, planning loosely for tomorrow's needs, the thinking not structured or verbal, but more associative and imagistic, memories and impressions and concerns flowing through awareness as the boundary between waking and sleeping becomes permeable. The sounds of the night are present but not threatening. The normal sounds of the cave and forest, the slight movement of air, the settling of cooling stone, the occasional call of nocturnal animals, all familiar enough to not trigger alarm, different enough from daytime sounds to reinforce that night has arrived, that the diurnal world has given way to the nocturnal world, that your family's active period has ended, and the cave now serves primarily as shelter, as safe harbor, as the fixed point around which your life revolves. As you slip toward sleep, There is a moment of reflection, not consciously structured but emotionally present. A sense of the day as unit, as completed cycle, as another rotation of the sun successfully survived, another set of challenges met adequately, another allocation of resources that leaves your family marginally better positioned than they were this morning, with stored meat and processed hides and knowledge gained by children and bodies that remain relatively healthy and uninjured. This is success in your world, not dramatic or extraordinary, but consistent and competent. The accumulation of small victories that together constitute survival, that together create the possibility of next week and next month and next season, that together push back against the constant pressure of entropy and decay and death that works against all living things. The satisfaction you feel is not pride exactly, not self-congratulation, but something quieter and deeper, a sense of adequacy, of having done what needed doing, of having fulfilled responsibilities to family and to the future, of having justified your existence through productive engagement with the world. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new needs, new dangers, the cycle repeating endlessly until injury or age or illness or accident or predation brings it to conclusion. And you will meet those challenges as you met today's, with the accumulated skill and knowledge of 30 years of survival, with the support of family members whose lives are interwoven with yours, with the tools and techniques and understandings that represent humanity's best solutions to the fundamental problem of existence in a world not designed for human comfort. For now, though, for this moment, as sleep claims you, as consciousness fades and dreams begin their strange narratives, you are warm and fed and safe enough, surrounded by family, having provided and protected, having lived another day in a world that gives nothing freely, having proven once again that humans, despite their physical limitations, despite their lack of natural weapons or armor or speed, can survive and even occasionally thrive through intelligence and cooperation and stubborn, persistent effort. And in the morning you will wake, if you wake, to cold and hunger and need, and the cycle will begin again, as it has for countless generations before you, as it will for countless generations after, the endless rotation of need and effort and occasional success that characterizes life for humans in this time. In this place, in this world, before agriculture and civilization and all the transformations they will eventually bring. The night continues, the stars rotating overhead in patterns, like family, constellations that help you mark seasons and time, their movements as reliable as anything in your experience. The moon a visible casting pale light that turns the landscape strange and beautiful and slightly threatening. And in the cave your family sleeps, breathing together, hearts beating together, bodies maintaining the temperature and chemistry of life through automatic processes far too complex to understand, but simple to experience. And beyond the cave, the world continues its own processes. Predators hunting, prey hiding, plants growing imperceptibly, water flowing, stone weathering, the vast interconnected system of which you are one small part, neither important nor unimportant in any cosmic sense, but essential to yourself, to your family, to the small circle of life that depends on your continued function, and that is enough. That is everything. That is the entire world that matters. And as sleep deepens, as dreams become more vivid and disconnected from waking reality, your consciousness explores scenarios and memories and fears and hopes in the peculiar logic of dreams, processing experiences, consolidating memories, preparing for tomorrow, the brain doing its nighttime work while the body rests, repairing damage, fighting infections, growing, maintaining, the machinery of life continuing, even in unconsciousness. And the fire burns low, the coals glowing faintly, the warmth slowly dissipating into the cold stone, and outside the predators move, and the prey hide, and the moon crosses the sky, and the stars wheel in their ancient patterns, and the world simply continues, indifferent to human concerns, operating according to laws far deeper and older than humanity. And morning will come, as it always does, inevitably, bringing light and warmth and new challenges and new opportunities, and you will meet them as you always have, with skill and courage and cooperation, and the simple stubborn refusal to surrender to a world that does not care whether you live or die. And that defiance, that insistence on continuing despite all difficulty, that is perhaps the most essentially human characteristic, the thing that separates humans from other animals, that accept their circumstances, and in your sleep you do not think any of these things consciously, but you embody them, you live them, you are them, and that is why you survive, why your family survives, why humanity survives and spreads and eventually comes to dominate this planet in ways you cannot imagine and would not recognize. All of it built on foundations laid by people like you, living days like this, surviving through skill and luck and cooperation. One day at a time, one meal at a time, one sunrise at a time, forever and always the same basic pattern of wake and work and eat and sleep. The fundamental human rhythm that connects all generations across all time. And as sleep takes you fully, as dreams become complete and consciousness fades entirely, you rest, you recover, you prepare unknowingly for tomorrow, for the continuation of the only life you have ever known or could ever imagine, the life of a survivor, a provider, a human being, 30,000 years before modernity, living and thriving and enduring in a world of raw beauty and casual death. And somewhere in your sleeping mind there is peace, there is satisfaction, there is the simple, deep contentment of having lived well enough to reach this moment, of having tomorrow remaining as possibility, of having family breathing near you, of having fire keeping darkness at bay, of having meat stored and tools maintained and knowledge accumulated, of having done today what needed doing. And perhaps, in the end, that is all any human in any time can truly hope for, to meet the challenges of their moment adequately, to provide for those who depend on them, to survive with dignity and skill through whatever circumstances they face. And you have done that. You do that. You will do that tomorrow and the day after and all the days until you cannot. And that is your life, simple and complete and sufficient. And now you sleep. The depth of sleep varies through the night, consciousness rising and falling in cycles, sometimes achieving the profound unconsciousness where dreams dissolve into nothing and the self seems to disappear entirely, other times hovering closer to wakefulness, where sounds from the outside world penetrate, where the feeling of cold intensifies enough to trigger slight movement, pulling furs tighter, shifting position to press closer against the warmth of family members. These adjustments happening in a state between sleep and waking that leaves no memory afterward, automatic responses that require no conscious direction. Your body cycles through its repair processes, muscles rebuilding fibers damaged by the day's exertions, immune system fighting the constant low-level infections that characterize life in close contact with dirt and animals and unprocessed foods, hormonal systems adjusting to maintain equilibrium, the brain sorting through experiences and consolidating important memories while allowing irrelevant details to fade, all of this happening in darkness, in stillness, in the vulnerable state that sleep represents. And this vulnerability is why the cave matters, why fire matters, why family members sleeping nearby matter. Because true rest requires some degree of safety, some reduction in the constant vigilance that waking hours demand. Around the third hour past midnight, though you have no concept of hours or clocks or measured time, knowing night only as the period between sunset and sunrise, as darkness rather than light, around this time you surface briefly toward consciousness, some small sound or sensation pulling you upward from deep sleep, and in this half-aware state you perform the automatic assessment, listening to the sounds of the cave, feeling the temperature. Sensing through means both conscious and unconscious, whether anything requires attention, whether danger has arrived, whether intervention is needed. The fire has burned very low, just a few coals remaining, their glow barely visible, providing almost no warmth at this point. And you consider for a moment whether to rise and rebuild it, to add fuel and restore heat and light. But the effort required seems too great. The cold that would come from leaving the furs too punishing, and you make the calculation that morning is not so far away that the family can endure until dawn without additional fire, that the energy cost of rising now exceeds the benefit, and this calculation made, you sink back toward sleep, consciousness fading again. The brief moment of wakefulness leaving almost no trace. But sleep this time is lighter, less complete, and dreams begin to populate your consciousness, strange narratives that follow their own logic, mixing memories of the day with deeper fears and hopes, creating scenarios that feel real while you experience them, but will seem absurd if remembered after waking. You dream of hunting, of stalking through forest that seems familiar, but is subtly wrong. Trees too large or too small, the light coming from wrong directions, and the prey you pursue shifts between deer and something else, something you cannot quite see clearly, and the hunt goes on without resolution, frustration building as the prey remains always just out of reach, and this frustration has quality of real emotion, your sleeping mind generating genuine feelings in response to imagined circumstances. The dream hunt becoming anxiety dream, becoming the fear of failure to provide, of returning empty-handed, of seeing your family hungry and knowing you have failed them. And this fear is real enough to cause physiological responses, heart rate increasing, stress hormones releasing, the body preparing for action, even though the threat is entirely imaginary, exists nowhere but in the electrochemical activity of your sleeping brain. The dream shifts, as dreams do, without transition or explanation, and now you are child again, learning to make tools under the guidance of your father, who has been dead for many years. His face in the dream both exactly as you remember and somehow wrong, and he is teaching you to nap flint, to strike stone against stone, at the precise angle with the precise force to remove flakes, to shape raw material into useful tool, and you watch your child hands in the dream struggling with the technique, feeling again the frustration of early learning, the way the stone would not cooperate, would break wrong, would resist your intentions, and your father's hands cover yours, guiding the motion, and there is safety in this moment, protection, the feeling of being cared for rather than being the caregiver, and this feeling is bittersweet, because you know even in the dream that this time is past, that you are now the father, the teacher, the protector, that this role has passed to you and cannot be returned, and there is grief in this recognition, mourning for the loss of childhood, for the death of your father, for the relentless forward movement of time that takes everything eventually, that transforms youth into age, that converts potential into memory. Again the dream shifts, and you are in the cave, but the cave is under attack, something large and dark pressing in through the entrance, and you are trying to defend your family, but your spear will not throw properly, your arm moving, as if through thick water, slow and weak, and the threat keeps coming despite your efforts, and terror mounts as you realize you cannot protect them, cannot fulfill your most basic responsibility, and you are shouting but no sound comes out, and family members are looking to you for salvation that you cannot provide, and the helplessness is crushing, overwhelming. And just as the threat reaches the fire, reaches your children, you surface from the dream with a startled intake of breath, heart pounding, body tense. And for a moment, the dream reality and waking reality are confused, and you are reaching for your spear before consciousness fully returns, before you realize that the cave is quiet, that no threat exists, that your family sleeps peacefully around you, that the terror was entirely internal, a creation of your own mind processing fears through the strange theater of dreams. Your breathing gradually slows, heart rate returning to normal, the adrenaline that flooded your system beginning to dissipate, and you lie in the darkness feeling foolish and relieved simultaneously, the dream already fading, the specific details becoming vague, though the emotional residue remains, a lingering anxiety that will take time to fully dissolve. Your mate stirs beside you, perhaps sensing your wakefulness, perhaps responding to your movement, and her hand finds yours in the darkness, a simple touch of reassurance, of connection requiring no words, no explanation, just the physical reminder that you are not alone, that partnership endures, and this small gesture helps more than you could articulate, grounds you back in reality, reminds you that the dream threats are not real, while the family around you is, and gradually you settle again, the tension leaving your muscles, sleep becoming possible once more. The pre-dawn hours are the coldest, the earth having radiated heat all night into clear sky, the temperature dropping to its minimum just before the sun returns, and you feel this cold penetrating the furs, finding your extremities, your feet and hands losing warmth, despite being covered, the body's core prioritizing vital organs, allowing peripheral temperature to drop. And this cold is unpleasant, but familiar, expected, just another aspect of life that must be endured. And you curl tighter, drawing knees toward chest, hands tucked into armpits, minimizing exposed surface area, maximizing heat retention, and eventually, despite the cold, you slide back towards sleep, consciousness fragmenting, thoughts becoming disconnected and strange. And the last period of the night passes in this liminal state, not quite awake, but not deeply asleep, suspended between worlds, between day and night, between consciousness and unconsciousness, existing in a mode that has no name, but is familiar to anyone who has spent cold nights without adequate heating. That particular state of semi-sleep, where you are aware of discomfort, but too tired to fully wake, where time seems to stretch strangely, where you drift and surface and drift again, waiting for morning, for the return of warmth and light, and the resumption of active life. The first birds begin calling, while darkness still dominates, their songs emerging from the forest, signaling that dawn approaches even before light appears. These songs serving territorial and mating functions for the birds, but serving also as alarm clock for humans who have learned to read the progression of morning through the sequence of which species begin singing, when the early singers indicating that sunrise remains some time away, while later singers indicate that light is imminent. You hear these songs in your half-sleep, not consciously cataloging species or interpreting meanings, but absorbing the information nonetheless, your brain processing the sounds and making automatic calculations about how much time remains before you must rise, before the day's demands become unavoidable. The youngest child wakes and begins to fuss, uncomfortable with cold or hunger or full bladder, making small sounds of complaint that could escalate to crying if needs are not addressed. and your mate responds automatically, her mothering instincts requiring no conscious activation, gathering the child close, providing warmth and comfort. Perhaps nursing, though the child is old enough, that nursing has become intermittent rather than constant, and the soft sounds of maternal care blend with bird song and the general ambient sound of the cave, and these sounds are soothing rather than disruptive, reminders of normalcy, of life continuing, of family functioning as it should. The quality of darkness begins to change, not lighter exactly but less absolute. A subtle shift that suggests dawn is coming, that the sun approaches the horizon even though it remains below. Its light beginning to scatter in the upper atmosphere, beginning the gradual transition that will culminate in sunrise. You open your eyes to this changing darkness, the cave interior still too dark for details, but no longer the absolute blackness of deep night. And with this opening of eyes comes the commitment to waking, to ending sleep, to beginning another day whether you feel ready or not, because readiness is not a luxury that your life affords, because the day will make its demands regardless of how you feel, and meeting those demands requires rising, requires overcoming the inertia of the warm furs and cold air, requires transitioning from rest to activity, despite the body's protests. You sit up slowly, the same deliberate process as yesterday morning, the same need to accommodate stiff joints and cold muscles, and the pattern repeats because the pattern works, because this is how mornings are managed when you live as you live, and the repetition is not boring but reassuring, is evidence of continuity, of stability, of surviving long enough to establish routines. The fire pit holds only ash this morning, the last coals having died sometime in the night, and this means fire must be created anew, must be brought into existence through effort and technique. And you gather the fire-starting materials, arranging them as you have arranged them thousands of times before, creating the small nest of tinder, positioning the char fungus that will catch sparks, preparing the sequence of materials from finest to finest, each size transition carefully planned to ensure that flame can grow from the tiniest beginning to the full fire that the family needs. The flint and striker come from your pouch. The striker, a piece of high-carbon stone that will produce sparks when struck sharply against the flint's edge, and you position everything, your body forming a windbreak, though there is little wind in the cave, just the automatic protective stance that fire starting requires, and you strike, the motion practiced and precise, and sparks fly, bright orange streaks in the darkness, falling onto the char fungus, and some stick tiny points of red, beginning to glow, and you bring the fungus to your mouth and blow gently, feeding oxygen to the tiny ember, coaxing it to grow, watching it spread across the fungus surface, and when it is ready, you transfer it to the tinder nest and blow again, more firmly now, and smoke rises, pale gray becoming white, increasing in volume, and then the first small flame appears, tentative and fragile, and you add the finest tinder, building the structure, giving the fire fuel and architecture, and within minutes you have succeeded. The fire is born again, pushing back darkness, beginning to radiate warmth, and this success never becomes routine, never feels automatic, always carries a small satisfaction, because fire is life, and creating it is powerful, is almost magical, even when you understand the practical mechanisms, is a technology so fundamental to human existence that its creation feels sacred, somehow feels like participating in something larger than mere survival. The growing light reveals the cave as it is every morning, the same stone walls, the same sleeping bodies now beginning to stir, the same accumulation of tools and materials and supplies, Everything exactly as it was yesterday and the day before and for all the days you have occupied this space. And this sameness is comforting rather than confining, is evidence that the night passed without disaster, that nothing fundamental has changed, that the world remains as you left it when you slept. Your mate is fully awake now, moving through her own morning routine, checking on children, organizing materials for the day ahead, her movements economical and practiced, and you work in parallel, not discussing plans, because the plans are obvious, dictated by season and weather and recent success and the ongoing needs that never fully disappear. The requirement to gather food and maintain tools and stay warm and stay safe, requirements that structure every day, that eliminate the question of what to do with time, because there is always more work than time, always more needs than resources, always the pressure of survival pushing against every hour. The older boy wakes and joins you at the fire, his presence a quiet statement of intent, indicating that he wants to accompany you again today, to continue his education in hunting and survival, and you acknowledge this with a nod, accepting his company, accepting the responsibility of teaching while also pursuing the practical goals of the day. The daughter wakes and joins her mother, the same unspoken communication happening, the same alignment of roles and responsibilities that characterizes your family's division of labor, not rigid or enforced through rules but organic and practical, evolved through years of cooperation, each person understanding their capabilities and contributions, each person's work valued because survival depends on all of it, because there are no unnecessary roles, no luxury positions, every function mattering, every person essential to the collective success that keeps the family alive. Breakfast is simple and quick, leftover meat from last night, not cooked fresh, but eaten as is, the cold fat congealed but still nutritious, still providing the calories needed to fuel the morning's exertions, and you eat without ceremony, without sitting together in the modern sense of a meal, just consuming fuel as efficiently as possible, because the day is beginning, because light is growing, because productive hours are limited and must be used. And every moment spent in the cave is a moment not spent gathering resources, and while rest is necessary, excessive rest is dangerous, is a luxury that can cost you when winter comes, when the stored resources either prove sufficient or prove inadequate based on the efforts of these autumn days. The food sits heavy in your stomach, the meat taking time to digest, providing sustained energy release, rather than the quick burst that simple sugars would provide, and your body knows what to do with this nutrition, knows how to extract proteins and fats and vitamins, knows how to fuel muscles and brain and all the systems that keep you alive. Processes running automatically, requiring no conscious direction, just the miracle of metabolism, converting food into life, into movement, into warmth, into the energy that will power today's survival efforts. The light outside is growing rapidly now, the sun approaching the horizon, and you know from the color of the sky, from the quality of light, from signs too subtle to name, but absolutely clear to your experienced interpretation, that today will be fair, that the weather will hold, that conditions will be good for the work you have planned. This reading of weather is not infallible, but is accurate more often than not, built from decades of observation, from noting correlations between morning conditions and day's progression, from the accumulated weather wisdom that represents one of your culture's most valuable knowledge domains. Because understanding weather means knowing when to travel and when to shelter, when to hunt and when to stay close to the cave, when to gather and preserve, and when to rest. the weather determining so much of what is possible and what is dangerous that reading it correctly can mean the difference between life and death, between success and disaster, between comfort and suffering. You gather your tools again, the same items as yesterday because the tools change slowly, last for extended periods, represent significant investment that cannot be casually replaced, and managing your toolkit means maintaining what you have rather than constantly creating new, means knowing each tool's condition intimately, means predicting when replacement will be necessary and planning accordingly, gathering the right materials in advance, allocating time for creation when tools near the end of their useful life. Today's plan involves checking the fish trap that your mate mentioned yesterday, an efficient food source that requires maintenance but provides reliable returns, and also exploring to the east, territory that you know but have not visited recently, where conditions might have changed, where new resources might have become available, where observation and assessment might reveal opportunities worth exploiting. This combination of routine checking and exploratory investigation characterizes most days, balancing the known productive locations with the search for new options, maintaining current resources while seeking improvements. The dual strategy that prevents stagnation while not abandoning proven approaches. The balance between conservative reliance on established patterns and innovative search for better alternatives. The family separates again as morning establishes itself, your mate and daughter heading toward nut groves identified yesterday, the youngest child carried in the sling, his weight distributed across your mate's body in ways that make the burden bearable though not easy, and you watch them go with automatic concern, knowing they will face their own risks, their own challenges, but trusting in their competence, in their knowledge, in their ability to handle whatever the day presents, because you have no choice but to trust, because the family's needs exceed what any individual can provide alone, because survival requires division of labor, requires that different people pursue different tasks simultaneously. And this division means separation, means that you cannot protect them directly, cannot monitor their safety continuously, can only trust that the skills you have all developed will prove sufficient for whatever circumstances arise. And with that trust extended, that concern acknowledged but set aside, you turn your attention to your own work, to the tasks that only you can perform, to the hunting and exploring and assessing that constitute your contribution to family survival. You and your son leave the cave, stepping out into morning light that is still slanted and golden. The sun recently cleared the horizon, shadows long, the world revealed in relief, every texture emphasized by the low angle of illumination. And the beauty of this moment is not lost on you, though you do not conceptualize it as beauty exactly, having no aesthetic vocabulary that separates beautiful from ugly, no framework for evaluating visual experience as art. But you experience the pleasure nonetheless, the satisfaction of seeing the world revealed again, the gratitude for another day granted, the simple good feeling that sunrise brings after the vulnerability of night. These feelings operating below language, below conscious analysis, just the animal satisfaction of being alive, being capable, being present in a world that continues to offer opportunities for those skilled enough to exploit them. The air is cold and clear, your breath visible, the temperature having dropped below freezing during the night, frost coating plants and stones. This frost evidence of how cold it became, how vulnerable you would be without fire and shelter and furs, how quickly exposure would kill, the frost beautiful and dangerous simultaneously, like so much in your world where beauty and threat intertwine constantly, where the same aspects of reality that provide wonder also present danger. The path toward the river is familiar, traveled countless times, your feet finding their way automatically across uneven ground, avoiding obstacles, maintaining balance on slopes. All the adjustments that walking on natural terrain requires happening without conscious thought, leaving your attention free to scan surroundings, to observe and assess and learn, to watch for animal sign, for changes in vegetation, for anything unusual or noteworthy, for opportunities and threats, the constant vigilance that characterizes all travel outside the cave's immediate vicinity, the inability to ever fully relax, to ever stop monitoring, because the world is dangerous and attention is your primary defense, the ability to see threats coming, to notice opportunities arising, to read the landscape like language, interpreting signs and signals, and making the rapid calculations that determine appropriate responses. Your son follows, learning this vigilance through observation and participation, his own scanning patterns becoming more sophisticated with each outing, his ability to notice relevant details improving, his understanding of what matters and what doesn't slowly developing through the accumulated experience that cannot be rushed, cannot be taught through explanation alone, but must be built through time and practice and the feedback of consequence. The river comes into view through the trees, the water flowing smoothly, the sound of it constant and soothing, and you approach cautiously as always, because rivers are gathering places where animals come to drink, where predators wait for prey, where encounters happen, and approaching carelessly invites disaster, invites stumbling into situations already in progress, invites surprising animals that might respond violently to sudden human presence. But this morning, the river appears peaceful, no large animals visible, just birds working the shallows, searching for insects or small fish. Their presence actually reassuring because birds are sensitive to threats, will flush and flee if predators approach, serve as early warning system for observant humans, and their calm behavior suggests that nothing threatening is immediately present, that the river is as safe as it ever gets, safe enough to approach, to work at the fish trap, to briefly let down some of the constant guard. The fish trap is visible from the bank, positioned in shallows where current is strong enough to bring fish, but not so strong as to damage the structure, and you wade into the cold water, the shock of it immediate and intense, the river fed by snowmelt and springs, temperature only marginally above freezing, and the cold penetrates immediately, your feet going numb within seconds, and you work quickly, not because of urgency exactly, but because minimizing time in the cold water is simply practical, is simply wise, is reducing unnecessary suffering and unnecessary risk of hypothermia. The trap has worked. Several fish visible in the enclosure, their movement slowed by cold water, and you harvest them quickly, grabbing each fish and dispatching it with a blow to the head. Quick death, minimum suffering, and within minutes you have perhaps 2 kilograms of fish, good protein, valuable nutrition, another contribution to the family larder, another success to add to yesterday's deer kill, the accumulation of small victories that together constitute abundance, that together mean your family will eat well, will enter winter with stored resources, will have margins for error, for bad luck, for the inevitable difficulties that cold season brings. The fish go into your carrying bag, the trap is reset, checked for damage, and finding only minor wear that can be addressed during the next visit, and you exit the cold water gratefully, feet so numb, now that walking is clumsy, sensation absent, just blocks at the ends of your legs, and you know from experience that warming will hurt, that the return of sensation will be painful, that you will endure perhaps 10 minutes of intense discomfort as blood flow returns and nerves wake up. But this is temporary and familiar, Just another small hardship, another price paid for food obtained. The equation always present, discomfort exchanged for calories, risk exchanged for resources, the trades that define survival, the calculations that fill every day, weighing costs against benefits, making decisions based on incomplete information, on probability rather than certainty, on experience rather than guarantee. As feeling gradually returns to your feet, bringing the predicted sharp pain that makes you wince and shift weight from foot to foot, you continue eastward along the river, following its course into territory you know but have not recently visited, and this exploration is purposeful, directed by the understanding that territories change, that what was productive last season might be depleted now, while new opportunities might have emerged, that knowledge becomes outdated, that continuous learning is necessary, that complacency about the landscape is dangerous, because the landscape never stops changing, resources shifting, animal populations moving, plants flourishing in some areas and declining in others, the dynamic nature of the environment requiring dynamic response, requiring that your mental map constantly update, that information remains current, that assumptions are regularly tested against fresh observation. Your son walks beside you now rather than behind, his confidence growing, his comfort in the wilderness increasing, and you allow this positioning, recognizing that he is ready for this small increase in independence, that he benefits from the responsibility of navigating beside you rather than simply following, that his education requires graduated challenges, requires that he slowly take on more decision, making more autonomy, more of the burden that will eventually be entirely his when you are gone. When age or injury or illness or accident removes you from the family group, when he must step into your role fully, and preparing him for that inevitability is perhaps your most important work, more important even than the daily provision, because provision matters only for the present, while education matters for the future, determines whether your family line continues or ends, whether the knowledge you carry passes forward or dies with you. The river curves and the terrain rises slightly, taking you away from the water's edge into mixed forest and open patches, and in one of these open areas you see evidence of grazing, the grass cropped short, the ground disturbed by hooves, and you stop to read this sign, kneeling to examine the tracks, measuring their size, noting their freshness, and determining that a small herd of aurochs passed through here recently, probably yesterday or the day before, the massive wild cattle that your people sometimes hunt when conditions are favorable, when numbers are sufficient to attempt such dangerous prey, because a single auroch provides enormous quantities of meat, perhaps 300 kilograms of usable material, enough to justify the significant risk that hunting them entails, these animals being powerful and aggressive, capable of killing humans with their horns and hooves, requiring coordinated group hunting, requiring careful planning and execution and willingness to accept casualties, because sometimes hunters die in these hunts. Sometimes the auroch wins, and those deaths must be weighed against the massive food benefit that success provides, the calculations never simple, the decisions never easy, always involving probability and risk, and the values you assign to different outcomes. You file this information away, making note of the auroch's presence, considering whether to organize a group hunt, whether other family groups might be interested in cooperation, whether the potential rewards justify the very real risks. These thoughts not fully formed or articulated but present as inclinations, as tendencies, as the background processing that your mind does constantly, assessing, evaluating, planning loosely for futures that might or might not materialize, maintaining flexibility while still preparing, keeping options open while still moving forward, the cognitive style that serves survival better than either rigid planning or complete improvisation, the balance between structure and adaptation that characterizes effective response to uncertain environments. Your son asks about the tracks, and you explain what you see, teaching him to measure size, to assess freshness, to estimate numbers, to read the story that tracks tell about animal behavior and movement, building in him the literacy of sign reading that separates competent hunters from excellent ones, that allows tracking of animals across impossible distances, that permits following of trails that to untrained eyes appear non-existent, the expertise that looks like magic, but is actually the accumulation of tens of thousands of observations, pattern recognition developed through immersion and practice and feedback, the brain's incredible capacity to detect subtle regularities, to find signal in noise, to extract meaning from minimal information. Further along, you find a tree heavy with ripe berries, a late-season fruiting that represents unexpected opportunity, and you begin harvesting, filling your hands, eating some immediately because the sweet tartness is delicious, is intensely satisfying after the meat. Heavy diet of recent days is providing vitamins and plant compounds that your body craves even without understanding why it craves them, just following the deep biological imperatives that guide food selection, that make certain flavors appealing and others aversive, that evolved over millions of years to direct organisms toward nutritious foods and away from toxic ones. Your son joins in the harvesting, and together you fill a portion of the carrying bag, the berries mixing with the fish, not ideal but acceptable, the mild contamination worth tolerating to capture this resource that will not remain available long, that will either be eaten by birds or will spoil on the branch. That exists in this moment and must be taken now or lost forever. The opportunistic approach to resources that your life requires, taking what is available when it is available, storing when possible, but often simply consuming, living with minimal reserves, with thin margins, with the constant pressure of need pushing against the inconsistent supply of resources. As you harvest, you hear sounds from deeper in the forest, the crack of branches, the rustle of movement, something large displacing vegetation, and immediately your body responds. Adrenaline releasing, attention focusing, hand moving to your spear, mind running through possibilities, assessing threat level, preparing for response. And you signal your son to silence, to stillness, and together you watch the forest edge, waiting to see what emerges, whether predator or prey, whether threat or opportunity or something neutral that will pass without interaction. The sound grows closer, and then a shape appears, brown fur visible through the trees, and recognition comes. A bear, a large individual moving through the forest, and this is danger, serious danger, because bears are powerful and unpredictable and sometimes aggressive, and you are too close, are in a position where the bear will likely detect you, where encounter is probable, where your options are limited, and none are good. The bear continues forward, not yet aware of your presence, and you make rapid calculations, assessing escape routes, considering whether to retreat quietly or to make yourself known, trying to predict how this bear will respond to human presence, whether aggression or avoidance is more likely, and these calculations are informed by experience, by previous encounters, by the accumulated knowledge of how bears typically behave. But there are no certainties, no guarantees. Each animal is individual, each situation unique, and what worked before might not work now, and you must decide, must commit to a course of action. And you choose to make noise, to alert the bear to your presence, while maintaining distance, to give it opportunity to avoid you, because surprise is often what triggers attack. Surprise and the bear feeling trapped or threatened. And you call out a sharp vocalization that is not language exactly, but is clearly human, clearly intentional, and the bear stops, head swinging toward the sound, and for a long moment you are locked in mutual observation, human and bear regarding each other across, perhaps 40 paces, each assessing the other, and time seems to stretch, your heart hammering, your muscles tensed for flight or fight, though you know that you cannot outrun a bear, and that fighting would likely be fatal. Your spear useful only if the bear commits to attack and comes close enough for you to use it. The bear makes its decision, turning away, moving off at an angle that will take it away from your position, not running, but walking with purpose, choosing to avoid the encounter, and relief floods through you. Tension releasing, the danger passing, and you wait motionless until the bear is well away, until the sounds of its passage fade, until enough time has passed that moving will not cause it to reconsider, to return, to reassess, and then you and your son quietly leave the area, moving away from the berry tree, despite not having finished harvesting, because the berries are not worth the risk of another encounter, because you have taken what you could safely take, and attempting to get more would be greed rather than need, would be poor decision. Making would be the kind of choice that gets people killed, and you did not survive 30 years by making poor choices, by prioritizing minor gains over major risks, by failing to recognize when to withdraw, when to accept less than the maximum, when to be satisfied with enough rather than insisting on everything. Your son is shaken by the encounter, his face showing the fear that he felt, and you use this as teaching moment, talking quietly as you walk, explaining why you made the choices you made, why you alerted the bear rather than retreating silently, why you left berries unharvested rather than continuing after the bear passed, helping him understand the reasoning, the probability assessment, the risk management that underlies survival in a world with large predators, building in him the judgment that will keep him alive, that will allow him to make good decisions when he encounters similar situations without your guidance, when he must rely on his own assessment, his own courage, his own wisdom. The teaching is important, is worth the time it takes, because survival skills without judgment are incomplete, because knowing how to hunt and gather is insufficient if you lack the wisdom to know when to push forward and when to pull back, when to take risks and when to play safe, when to be bold and when to be cautious. The encounter has changed the tenor of the day, has reminded you both of the ever-present dangers, has sharpened the attention that had perhaps grown slightly complacent, and this reminder, though uncomfortable, is valuable, is part of why you survive, because the danger is real and forgetting it is fatal, because complacency kills, because the world never stops being dangerous, and you can never stop being careful, and periodic reminders, even frightening ones, serve the purpose of recalibrating awareness, of resetting vigilance to appropriate levels, of countering the natural human tendency to relax, to assume safety, to let guard down. You continue your exploration, but with modified behavior, making more noise as you move, alerting animals to your presence, rather than trying to remain undetected, because right now you are not hunting, are not trying to approach prey, but are simply moving through territory, and in this context being noticed is safer than surprising animals that might respond aggressively to sudden human appearance. The sun climbs toward its peak as morning advances toward midday, and you are working your way back toward the general direction of the cave, not directly, but in a loop that will allow you to check other areas of interest, to observe other locations, to continue the ongoing survey of your territory that never truly ends, that continues every day you leave the cave, the constant observation and assessment and updating that keeps your knowledge current, that allows you to notice changes, to spot opportunities, to detect threats before they become critical. You are traveling through an area of rocky outcrops, good habitat for certain types of prey, for marmots and pikas, and other small mammals that live in the rock crevices, and you are watching for them, hoping for opportunity to add to the day's take. When you notice something else, something that makes you stop suddenly, your hand automatically signaling your son to halt, to silence, because what you see is human sign, footprints in soft earth, recent, within the last day, and these prints are not from your family, are not familiar, are from strangers, from other humans whose presence in your territory raises questions and concerns. You examine the tracks carefully, counting individuals, assessing size and therefore likely age and sex, determining that this group includes at least 4 adults and possibly children, their print smaller and lighter, and they were moving purposefully, not wandering, but traveling with destination in mind, following the terrain in ways that suggest familiarity with the area. And this disturbs you because it suggests they are not just passing through, but may be regular users of this territory, may be competitors for the resources that your family depends on, and competition between human groups is always complicated, sometimes peaceful, but sometimes violent, depending on resource availability and group personalities and historical relationships and factors too numerous and complex to predict with certainty. You make note of the direction they were traveling, roughly parallel to the river, but higher on the slopes, and you consider following their trail, learning more about their numbers and intentions, but you also consider the risk that following might be interpreted as aggression, might lead to confrontation, might escalate situation that is currently just information into actual conflict. You decide to return to the cave, to inform the family group, to discuss this development with your mate, to consider responses collectively rather than acting alone, because decisions that affect group security should be group decisions, should involve all adults, should benefit from multiple perspectives and the collective wisdom that emerges from discussion. This decision means cutting short your exploration, means returning before you had planned. But the information about the other human group is important enough to justify the change in plans, is significant enough that immediate communication matters more than completing the day's original intentions. And this flexibility, this ability to reassess priorities based on new information, this willingness to change plans when circumstances warrant, this is another aspect of survival intelligence, another capacity that separates those who thrive from those who perish. The recognition that rigid adherence to plans is sometimes less effective than adaptive response to changing situations. The journey back to the cave is faster than the outward journey, your navigation more direct now that you are not exploring, not stopping to observe and assess, just covering ground efficiently, and your son struggles slightly to maintain the pace, but does so without complaint, understanding from your demeanor that something significant has occurred, that urgency is appropriate, that this is not the time for questions or delays. The fish in your carrying bag are beginning to smell. The warmth of the day, despite the cold morning, accelerating decomposition, and this smell reminds you that the fish must be processed soon, that delays risk spoilage, that resources are only resources if properly handled, if preserved before decay renders them useless. The constant race against entropy that characterizes food management in a world without refrigeration, without preservatives beyond smoke and salt and cold weather. The narrow windows between acquisition and spoilage that require attention and timing and rapid processing. You arrive at the cave in early afternoon, earlier than your family would normally expect you, and your mate sees your face, reads your expression, understands immediately that something has happened, and she comes to meet you, concern evident, and you tell her about the other human group, about the tracks, about the numbers and direction, and her face shows the same concern you feel. Because territory is life, because competition for resources in a world of scarcity is serious, because relationships with other groups can shift from neutral to hostile quickly, can become violent without much warning, can result in deaths and injuries and losses that your small family group can ill afford. She shares her own information from the day that she saw smoke from distant fires while gathering, in directions that suggest multiple groups are currently active in the general region. And this additional information compounds the concern, suggests that population density in this area has increased, that competition may be intensifying, that the easy times, if they ever existed, are ending, that vigilance must increase, that cooperation between adults must be absolute, that defenses must be considered and strengthened. The family works together to process the day's acquisitions, the fish cleaned and prepared for smoking, the berries sorted and eaten, plans made for tomorrow that include more attention to security, more checking of approaches to the cave, more awareness of smoke from fires that might reveal your location to others who might have hostile intent. The meat from yesterday's deer is smoking on racks above the fire, the strips drying and darkening, taking on the brown color and leathery texture that indicates successful preservation. And the sight of this stored food is comforting, is evidence that your family is preparing adequately for winter, is building the reserves that will mean survival when fresh food becomes scarce, when hunting is difficult and gathering nearly impossible, when the family must live primarily on stored resources supplemented by whatever can be obtained in harsh condition. Evening comes and the family gathers again around the fire, the pattern repeating, the cycle of work and rest and eating and sleeping that defines existence. And tonight there is discussion, more than usual, about the other human groups, about what their presence means, about how to respond, about whether to seek contact or avoid it, about security measures and contingency plans, about what to do if confrontation occurs. And these discussions are not structured like modern meetings with agendas and minutes, but are organic, meandering, punctuated by long silences, combining verbal communication with gesture and demonstration, building toward consensus through a process that has no formal rules but works nonetheless. That allows group decision-making, despite the absence of democratic procedures, that creates coordination through shared understanding rather than explicit command structures. The decision that emerges is to continue as normal, but with increased vigilance, to observe without initiating contact, to defend if necessary but not to provoke, to maintain awareness of the other group's locations and movements, to be prepared for various contingencies ranging from peaceful trade to violent conflict, the middle path that minimizes risk while not abandoning territory, that asserts your family's right to these resources while acknowledging that others may have competing claims, the diplomatic approach that seeks to avoid conflict without projecting weakness, because weakness invites exploitation, invites more aggressive groups to push boundaries, to take liberties, to test limits, and those tests sometimes escalate into violence, into situations where people die, where families lose members, where the fragile security that you have built can collapse in moments of bloody chaos. The meal tonight includes fish, the flesh flaky and mild, different from the strong flavor of venison, providing variety in diet that is appreciated not just for taste, but for the different nutrients that different foods provide. The body's wisdom recognizing that variety confers benefits, that eating the same foods exclusively can lead to deficiencies, that breadth in the diet provides more complete nutrition than narrow specialization. The youngest child delights in the fish, picking at it with his fingers, eating with the total focus that small children bring to activities, and watching him eat brings you satisfaction. The simple parental pleasure of seeing your child fed, seeing him growing, seeing him healthy and strong. These observations never becoming routine, never losing their emotional impact. Because you have seen children die, have buried your own, have stood helpless while illness or injury or accident took young lives, and every day that your children thrive is a day of victory, is a day of successful defense against the forces of death that work constantly to extinguish all life. After eating, your mate shows you plants she gathered, roots and tubers and leaves, and she tells you about each one, where she found it, how abundant it was, whether the location should be visited again soon, or allowed to recover her knowledge of plant resources as detailed and sophisticated as your knowledge of animals. Different expertise, but equally essential, complementary rather than competitive. The partnership working because both types of knowledge contribute. Both types of effort matter. Both roles are valued, not as abstract principle, but as practical reality, because you see directly how her work benefits the family. See the children eating plants she gathered. See the medicines she prepares, easing pain and fighting infection. See the materials she collects becoming useful objects, and this visible contribution creates respect, creates appreciation, creates the foundation for relationship that goes beyond reproductive biology, that includes genuine partnership, genuine sharing of life's burdens, and occasional pleasures. The older boy is working on his own small project, trying to shape a piece of flint into a knife blade, and you watch him work, offering occasional guidance, but mostly letting him learn through doing, through making mistakes, through discovering what works and what doesn't, because this learning is crucial, because he must develop the feel for stone, for how it breaks, for the angles and forces that produce desired results. And this knowledge cannot be transmitted verbally, cannot be explained in words, must be built through physical practice, through the feedback of success and failure, through the gradual development of skill that comes from repetition and attention and the desire to master the craft. His progress is slower than yours would be, his technique less refined, his results less consistent, but he is learning, is improving, and improvement is what matters. Is the trajectory that leads from novice to expert given sufficient time and motivation and practice. The fire burns down as the family prepares for sleep. The banking process executed carefully, preserving coals for morning, reducing fire to levels that provide some warmth without consuming excessive fuel. The management of fire and ongoing responsibility that structures the day's beginning and end, that requires constant attention, that can never be completely neglected because the consequences of fire loss are so severe, the difficulty of rekindling so great, that maintaining continuous fire from day to day, from season to season, from year to year becomes a priority that shapes behavior, that creates responsibilities, that links generations through the simple continuous burning of flame passed from person to person across time. Your fire descended from fires kept by your parents and their parents before them, reaching back through time to some unknown ancestor who first captured fire and passed it forward, creating a literal lineage of flame that parallels the genetic lineage of blood, both essential to human survival, both carefully maintained and protected and transmitted. Sleep comes again, as it does every night. The transition from waking to sleeping, marked by the gradual release of the day's tensions, the letting go of vigilance that waking requires, the trust that sleep demands, faith that the night will pass without disaster, that dawn will come again, that tomorrow will bring new opportunities to pursue the endless project of survival. And in this moment before consciousness fades completely, there is something like peace, like contentment, not the transcendent happiness that humans sometimes seek, but the simpler satisfaction of having met the day's challenges adequately, of having protected and provided, of having families safe and fed and sheltered, of having done your work well enough to earn rest, to justify this moment of vulnerability, to have earned through effort the right to stop, to sleep, to let go of the burdens that consciousness carries, and in that letting go there is relief, there is ease, there is the simple animal pleasure of tired body finding rest, of sleep arriving like mercy, like gift, like the temporary cessation of all struggle that allows recovery, allows restoration, allows tomorrow to become possible, and with that possibility held gently in mind, you drift away, consciousness dissolving into the darkness that is not empty, but filled with the presence of family breathing near you, filled with the warmth of fire and furs, filled with the sounds of night and forest, and the ongoing life of the world that continues whether you wake or sleep, whether you live or die, the vast indifferent world that nonetheless provides the stage on which your small human drama plays out. And for now, for this night, for these hours of darkness, you rest within it, you sleep within it, you trust yourself to it, and it holds you, holds your family, holds all the countless small lives that populate its vast expanse. And morning will come as it always does, as it has come for millions of years before humans existed, and will come for millions of years after humans are gone. The sun rising indifferent and eternal, bringing light and warmth and the renewal of the endless cycle. And you will wake to meet it if you wake. And if you do not wake, there will be others who do, others who will continue the work you have done, who will hunt and gather and make fire and raise children and struggle and endure and occasionally triumph. And in this way humanity continues, has continued, will continue. Each generation building on the previous, each life adding its small contribution to the vast project of survival, of persistence, of refusing to disappear despite all the forces that work toward extinction. And this refusal, this stubborn insistence on continuing, this is perhaps what makes you human, what defines your species, what separates you from other animals that accept their circumstances without resistance, and even in sleep you embody this. You live this. You are this. And that is enough. That is everything. That is the whole of existence, distilled to its essence, to survive, to continue, to endure, to pass forward the fire and the knowledge and the life itself. And in serving these purposes, you fulfill your function, you justify your existence, you earn your place in the great chain of being, and no more can be asked, no more is necessary, no more is possible than this. And so, you sleep.